Hello and welcome to IT Pro in the Know, the IT Pro TV webinar series brought to you live from the IT Pro TV studios. I'm your host, Wes Bryan, and if you like what you see here today, you'll be happy to know that this is the format that all of our IT Pro TV courses follow. So what is IT Pro TV? Well, we call it binge-worthy IT learning because we offer an engaging way to learn and grow your career. It doesn't matter if you're just setting foot in this industry or maybe you're a seasoned professional, we've got the courses to meet your needs. And they're coming at you from a variety of vendors globally recognized, such as Cisco, Microsoft, CompTIA, Apple, Linux, and more. And we've got thousands of hours of content to keep you busy, including some of the more popular topics like security and cloud. All online, all on demand. Check us out at itpro.tv. Today's presenter is Don Pizzette, and Don Pizzette is coming to us with more than 20 years' experience in IT. Not only is he one of the edutators here at IT Pro TV, he's also the co-founder, and he's vendor certified by Microsoft, Google, CompTIA, and Cisco. So what do you say we get started with today's topic, surviving a DDoS attack, our story. Help me in welcoming to the stage to tell that story, Mr. Don Pizzette. Don, how are we doing today, sir?
I am doing great, Wes. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
So in this webinar, we're going to be taking a look at a distributed denial of service attack. And like the title implies, it's surviving a DDoS, our story. We actually have a real example of a DDoS that was pointed at our website. And unfortunately, in today's security climate, a lot of companies don't like to talk about the attacks that they've had. They can't reveal details. Maybe it's tied up in litigation or they're just embarrassed or something of that nature. Well, we're not like that. We have all that information and the data, and this is a chance for us to share that with you and show what it looks like to be under an attack, how to recognize it, how to basically get in there and mitigate the attack and keep your system up and going. So it's a chance to get to see kind of behind the curtains of one of these attacks. Now, before I dive into the actual presentation, I want to make sure that I present this in a way that is meaningful to you, the viewer. We have a lot of people in attendance today, so I want to make sure I have an understanding of where the majority of you are coming from. So what we've done is we've worked on a little poll, a chance to just kind of gauge where you're at as far as security preparedness. And let me just run through some of the options here. Basically what we're asking is, how prepared do you feel for a potential distributed denial of service attack? And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just kind of gauging where you're at. The first option is, our company has DDoS mitigation technology in place. That's great. I hope everybody's there, but the reality is these are fairly new, dynamic types of attacks, and so most companies aren't quite ready. So I don't expect to see a ton of people there. B, we rely on someone else, ISPs, cloud provider, et cetera, to mitigate DDoS attacks for us. Hey, why take a risk yourself when you can defer that off to somebody else and have them deal with it? It's a great solution. There are a lot of different providers that are out there. Option C, we don't have a DDoS mitigation strategy in place. If you answer with this one, you'll be in line with the majority of companies that are out there that they just aren't prepared for it. And then lastly, we do not have public-facing resources. This means you're not on the internet, or at least your corporate resources aren't on the internet, and thus DDoS attacks aren't really a big deal for you. You might have an internal one, but those are traditionally easier to deal with. All right, so that's a pretty good rundown. I think everybody's had enough time to be able to get in there and answer. If you haven't, this is your last couple of seconds here to jump in and provide your answer. And then we're going to reach over to Wes. And Wes, why don't you give me an idea of who's our number one answer?
Absolutely. We always give the presenter a chance to test their psychic abilities here. Which answer do you think the majority of our viewers have chosen?
This is a tough one. Over the years, I think this has changed, because a couple of years ago, we could easily say like C or even D, but D's not even really an option anymore. Most companies have to have some kind of internet presence. I hope that most people are in A or B, but I suspect C is going to be our winner. So I'm going to go with C.
All right, we got to find out what is behind door number, letter C, because you would be right. C is the right answer there. It looks like the majority of the people are going to be there, so it's good that we have a lot of people attending our webinar today.
Awesome. Well, like I said, there is no right or wrong answer. I'm going to tell you a story, and the story is about the DDoS that we experienced and what we went through as we kind of had to deal with this process. And if we put it in perspective of that answer, we don't have a DDoS mitigation strategy in place. Well, I'll describe that as we go through steps that you could take right now, inexpensively, right? I'm not going to, well, I will talk about some $50,000 type solutions, but we'll talk about some solutions that are as little as like $20 that you could implement to be able to get yourself prepared to deal with stuff like this. All right, so let's start off with really how things kicked off. When you're a company, and you have resources that are out there on the internet, well, you're susceptible to an attack from anybody on the entire planet, anybody who can access your website or your web application or whatever process it is you have online. And a distributed denial of service attack is simply one type of attack. But there's actually more than one form of denial of service attack. For example, a lot of people, when they hear about it, they immediately think of what's called a volumetric attack. Volumetric attacks are really hard to pull off, and that's where an attacker floods your site with data. You know when you're under a volumetric DDoS attack because your bandwidth numbers spike through the roof. The problem with those is they're fairly difficult to pull off, and they're easy to see, so it's easy to stop. And as a result, we really haven't seen any major volumetric attacks over the last few years. There have been a few where people are trying to set records, like how many terabits of data can they move at a given time, and they've set some good records. But most companies aren't going to undergo volumetric attacks. Instead, they're going to undergo more sophisticated attacks, like what happened with our website. Now, let me tell you the story of what happened with ours, starting with the first phase. And there's really like 5 phases that we go through, but the first phase is detection. So the attack started on our website. But we didn't know that, right? I remember the day specifically because my wife and I, we had heard about a new restaurant. We went out there, so we're having dinner, and we get a text message from someone saying, "Is your site down?" Okay, that's not the way you want to detect an attack, but that was the text we got. And so both of us just immediately start logging into the site from our phone, and we can log in just fine. Yeah, site's up for us, looks all right. So we labeled that person, we kind of labeled him patient zero, right? This person is experiencing the problem. We don't know if it's a widespread epidemic yet. We just have one person. Maybe it's an issue on their computer. So then we started reaching out to the rest of the team. We got the developers to take a quick look. They could log in just fine. So it looked like everything was fine. But when we started looking around on the back end, we started seeing some other things. We started asking the user, because by now, after about an hour, we had another 2 or 3 people write in and say, "Hey, I can't get to the website." And we said, "Hey, can you send us a screenshot? Like, what error are you getting?" And they started sending us back this. Now, we use a web application firewall. And at the time, we were using one from a company called Securi. Securi is a very inexpensive solution. It's a great web application firewall. In the early days of our company, our website was built using WordPress. WordPress is a very popular content management system, and Securi specializes in protecting WordPress sites. That was what we used. Well, this error is an indicator that the user was able to get to Securi. They were able to get to the web application firewall, and then Securi was not able to get to us. There was some kind of problem on our side, and the problem is hosting timeout. Not that it was rejected or blocked or not that it couldn't reach that IP, but that it timed out waiting for the server to respond. This is usually what you'll start to see when your server is getting overloaded. You'll get things like 500 errors. Those are errors that are server side. Versus like we've probably all seen a 404, page not found. Well, that means you talked to the server and the server told you it couldn't find a page. The server's working. But a 500 or some other type of timeout, those indicate that the server didn't even respond to you or that it tried to do something and completely failed to do it. So those are indicators that something is going wrong. And that's what we recognize. So, all right, we've got a problem. And the problem is most likely not the user's fault. That's a hard one to establish early on.
All right, Don. So if you've got the detection phase, what do we do when we go into the next? What's the next phase?
All right, so now we know we have a problem.
Right.
And it sounds silly, but you do have to recognize that. You have to say, all right, do I actually have an issue or is it the end user? So at this point, we had a pretty good suspicion that there was something going on our site that wasn't right. And so we started to look around. We moved into phase 2, which is identify the cause. What is causing people to get this error? All right. Well, on our side, we have a number of different systems you pass through in order to get to our site. You have, well, the web application firewall that you pass through. Then you have the web front end servers that you hit. You have our application servers that are feeding that web front end. And behind them, you have database servers that are actually providing the data that goes into the site. Any one of those elements could become overwhelmed and start to display messages like these, start to time out. So we had to look and figure out, where is this all breaking down? All right. When we looked at the web front end servers, they were fine. There really wasn't anything out of the ordinary on them. They looked pretty good. We looked at our database servers. They were fine. They were responding to activity like we expected. But when we looked at our application servers, what sits in between our web front end and our database servers, actually our API. When we looked at the API, we saw this. Right? Now, What I'm looking at here are the API's log volumes. So how frequently it was generating errors and the delay in response time on the API. And if we look closely at that, what you can see is that our response time was nice and low, like we expected to see, very, very stable. And then all of a sudden, we got walloped right there. And that's likely when that first user sent in that message saying, hey, I can't log into the site. I can get the front end, right, to get to our website, because that's just rendered by the front end. But then when they try and log in, well, logging in sends a call to the API, and the API reaches out to the database. All the systems get involved when you're logging in. When you're just going to the home page, none of that happens. Just the front end is involved, right? So we have to understand the scope of user access and where that problem originates. But at a minimum, anybody, even somebody who's never worked on our system before, should be able to look at a chart like this and say, that's not normal. You know, what happened at that time that made the response time crank up to, well, ultimately, this is at 14 seconds, right? If you go to a website and it takes 14 seconds to load, do you say, oh, well, at least it worked? No. Probably by second number 5, you say, well, let me go to a different website, right? People don't wait for web pages to load. This is a problem. Our servers were up, our servers were operational, but they were running really, really slow. And the API was getting overwhelmed, which is just a great indicator of a problem. Now, when I looked at this, I'm not a developer. I didn't write the API, and so the dev team started working on diagnosing those errors, right? What are the errors that are being generated? What is slowing down the API? And while they were doing that, I said, look, let me look at the traffic. Traffic is something I know. I'm a network engineer by trade, so let me look at the network. And I pulled up a map. We have a map that shows where users are visiting our site from. And ITProTV has subscribers all over the world. I think it's something like 30% of our subscribers are outside of the United States, which is awesome. We have some great international members. But when I pulled this map up, I was shocked, right? Because while we do have international subscribers, we don't have them everywhere. Our product is filmed in the English language. And as a result, most of our subscribers are in the United States, Canada, the UK, and Australia. That's where I expect to see people. Then we do have subscribers in India and Japan and a few other places like that. But look at South America here. In South America, in really most South American countries, Spanish is the primary language, or Portuguese, not English. And we do have some subscribers in South America, but not many. I mean, it's a real small number. Same thing goes for Africa. We have a very small user base in Africa. And all across Asia, we have next to no customers in China. But when I looked at this map, I'm seeing traffic from everywhere. That's not normal, right? I'm seeing traffic, and these little green marks mean this is traffic that our web application firewall said is okay and is allowing it to come in. So all of this traffic has been inspected, cleared as okay, and been sent along. Now, I looked at that, and I just knew because of our user base that was not right. We shouldn't be getting all that traffic. So it's being cleared. It's being given the green light. That doesn't make any sense. If we're under an attack, surely security would have recognized that and stopped it, right? That would make sense. Well, this type of attack is different. If it was a volumetric attack, if it was just zombies, that were throwing junk traffic at us to overwhelm a line, yes, security would have seen that. They would have stopped it. If it was traffic using known exploits, if they were trying to do SQL injection attacks, yes, security would have stopped it, hands down. They do that every single day, right? But this was legitimate traffic. When I pulled up the traffic logs, this is a little Excel sheet that I dumped, or it was a CSV that I dumped, of live traffic during the attack. And what I saw when I looked at it was this traffic was coming from a number of different IPs, and it was going to /login. It was people pulling up our login page. Is that an attack? Is that a SQL injection? No, it's just they were pulling up our login page. But they weren't actually pulling it up. If you look, I've got an IP, and they're sending the post command. They're sending credentials to /login, all right? Usually, you see a get first. They get the login page, and then they post to it when they log in. Here, I'm seeing tons of logins with no gets associated with them. See right here, I've got a get /course-library/MTA-cloud fundamentals, blah, blah, blah. somebody was watching MTA Cloud Phone. That's legitimate subscriber traffic right there. They're viewing something, and it's a get. They're viewing the page. That's what I expect to see, not just a bunch of posts, right? That was another great indicator that somebody is flooding traffic at our site. And look at all these IPs. It's a ton of different IPs. By the time the attack was over, I believe there were around like a hair over 6,000 different IPs that had all been a part of this attack. It was a huge amount. This is just a small capture from inside of that attack. Right? There's some other things that let us know this is not good. For example, if we look at the browser agent, right? The browser agents on these, that legitimate traffic up here, that get message, if I come over and look, oh, it kind of got cut off here, but it was Google Chrome traffic. But if I look at all these other ones, right, tons of different IPs, and it's showing Linux, all right, that's fine. I use Linux myself. Android 5.0, all right, that's a little weird. Android 5.0 is fairly old, right? Android 8 is out now. Most people are running Android 7, maybe Android 6, but Android 5, that's pretty old. And then a Nexus 4, all right, that's a pretty old phone as well. It's not supported anymore. But here I have thousands of IPs that are all running Android 5 on a Nexus 4, all accessing the login page. That's just weird, right? That's not normal. And by identifying that all this traffic is identical, that tells me this is an automated attack. So now I know that somebody is throwing automated traffic right at our login form, and I've got a problem. Now, oh, go ahead, Wes.
I was just going to ask, so you've done the detection phase, right? You've done the identification based on anomalies. Are we into the next phase yet, or we still have a little more?
Yeah, so basically at this point, we know what's going on, right? We have a good idea of what's going on, and the only thing we don't necessarily know is the why, but there's a pretty good guess. You're like, why is somebody attacking our site? A lot of times, you don't have an answer to that. Maybe they're demanding a ransom. We weren't getting any ransom demands, or if they sent us one, we didn't do a good job receiving it. So we never actually had any communication from whoever was doing this. So why? I don't know why, but I have a pretty good guess, right? ITProTV, we create video-based training for IT administrators, system admins. Those are good targets, aren't they, right? If you can compromise the account of one of our subscribers, that's somebody who administers servers and workstations for companies. That would be a good person's credentials to have. Well, if they attack our site, that's one thing. But what a lot of times they can do is they can find sites that were already compromised, right? Like Adobe. Adobe had a huge compromise 10 years ago. And so there are databases of hundreds of thousands of email address and password combinations from the Adobe hack. You can go on the like a Tor or Onion network, the dark web, and you can get a copy of these databases. You can buy them for just a couple of dollars. And now you have this list of credentials. You could replay them against a site like ours and just run through and see if any of them work, right? If they work, you're a winner. You just found a login for a sysadmin somewhere. If they don't work, who cares? You just move on to the next one, right? And so that's what this was basically a password validation attack. Now, it's kind of two-pronged. On one side is overwhelming our site, trying to bring it down, okay? So maybe that's their intent. But even if they don't bring our site down, which they really weren't, they get the side benefit of let's identify some credentials that are valid, right? So that's likely the why they were attacking us. So the next phase for us was to do something about it. Now, it's important to sit down, think about what's going on, come up with a long-term permanent solution. But when you're under the gun and customers are complaining and you're creating a bad user experience and the CEO is asking you, what's going on? When's this going to be working? Then you start thinking of a temporary solution. What is something that I can do right now that won't impact my users too much, but stop this attack? Now, we were fortunate in that we did have a web application firewall in place already. On that WAF, what we can do is turn on something very, very simple called a CAPTCHA. Security has support for it. It's a check mark in a box, and all of a sudden, any visitor to your site is presented with a CAPTCHA. Now, all of the attack traffic that you saw, they were post messages. They weren't gets, right? They weren't getting our login page. They were just posting right to it. Well, if you post, you don't see the page. So you wouldn't even see the CAPTCHA, better yet be able to attempt to answer it. So all of that traffic immediately would start failing the CAPTCHA. A legitimate user would see the CAPTCHA, answer it, and then go into the website and be able to use it, right? So we implemented that. It was a checkbox. And once we turned that on, this is what our traffic map started to look like. A lot different, isn't it? Now, this is what I expect to see. I've got a lot of users in the US, a couple in Canada, we've got some over in Europe, some down in Australia, next to no one in South America, Africa, and China. And they're all red dots or tags or darts, whatever they are, all getting blocked, right? This traffic is now being stopped. Effectively, at this point, the distributed denial of service attack is over. Now, I say it's over. The traffic's still coming in. It's pouring. It poured in for hours after this, so it just kept going. I think the total attack ended up lasting about 7 hours. But anyhow, so it just kept going. But we didn't care at that point because it was all being stopped at the WAF, at the boundary, not even getting to our web front ends, not getting to our API, not getting to our database, all being stopped by that CAPTCHA. All right. So that's the temporary solution. You put that in place, everybody's protected, and now we're in where we have some breathing room. Right now, I could sit back and I could say, okay, our regular subscribers can log right in, have a great experience after the CAPTCHA. They can log in. Now we've got some breathing room. Let's figure out our long-term solution. And so now that I had a little bit of time, I started kind of just wondering, like, all right, what are these machines that are attacking us? Let me take a look. Right, there's a bunch of them out there. What are those? Is this some kind of concerted effort from individual people, or is it a nation state? Let's go and take a look. And what I found, I picked a few at random. Most of them were digital video recorders, DVRs. They were security camera systems. Here's one, for example, that I pulled up. It's a Samsung TechWin NVR, right? And it was connected to the internet with a public IP. I could browse right to its page, and I didn't try to log into it because this is likely a regular person, just an average Joe. The language on the screen, I believe, is Polish, so I'm just assuming that they're in Poland. I didn't geolocate this IP. So if I were to log into this machine, this could be somebody unknowing, in which case I would be breaking the law logging into it. But what I was able to see from here, though, is that this is just a video recorder, right? Not properly secured, likely exposed to the internet with a default password or an easy-to-guess password or a well-known vulnerability that's not been patched, because people put in these security systems and they never update them. They never do firmware updates. They just leave them vulnerable, and then you end up where we're at right here. So that kind of stopped me from being able to reach out and fix the problem, right? I'm not going to hack back because these are regular people. And I can't call up the authorities and say, look, some video recorder in Poland is hitting our site. It's not that person's fault. They're not going to get much done. So the idea of stopping the attack at its source went away. And I'll be honest with you, in pretty much every denial of service attack that I've had to deal with over the years, it's never been effective to try and stop it at its source. That it's just too easy for people to compromise thousands of machines and form a botnet and perform the attack through other people's systems. So you end up having to stop it yourself. So these are all things that factored into me coming up with a long-term solution to solve our problem. All right, so that moves us into our next phase, which is actually implementing a permanent solution. Now, we had a couple of problems here. Our main problem was that we had a web application firewall in place, but it didn't understand our website like it used to. We had outgrown our web application firewall. I mentioned Securi. Securi is a great product. I've met both the owners of the company. I love what they do. If you run a WordPress site, you're hard-pressed to find a better product to secure your WordPress site. But it is designed for WordPress. And about 3.5 years ago, our website had grown so much that WordPress wasn't a good fit for us anymore. And so we moved to an entirely in-house built learning management system. So we completely built a custom solution for ITProTV. And that meant the security didn't really know how our website worked. So they couldn't recognize that, hey, getting a bunch of posts on your login page with no associated gets is not right. They don't recognize that. Because in WordPress, you log into a different URL. You log into /wp-login, and that's different. And it's all PHP, which most of ours is not. Most of ours is JavaScript. So it's too different, and they weren't able to catch that. Now, unfortunately, they specialize in WordPress. So we couldn't really create any custom rules or anything to be able to deal with that. We had simply just outgrown the product. And so what we ended up doing was switching to another web application firewall. And for us, we moved over to a solution from Imperva that's called Encapsula. Encapsula is one of the market leaders in web application firewalls. They're expensive, but our company had grown, and it was time to step up to expensive to put it in place. The biggest advantage of moving up to Encapsula is we could write custom rules that let us dictate the behavior of our site. And so what we were able to do was come in and create what are called protected pages. Now, protected pages let you do things like password protection or require two-factor authentication to access a page, require a CAPTCHA, and so on. But I didn't want a CAPTCHA on my login page that affected every user. I just wanted to affect suspected bot activity. And so we were able to write a custom rule in there that looks like this. It basically just steps in and it says, if somebody comes to the login page, they have to have JavaScript support. If they don't have JavaScript support, display a CAPTCHA and make them authenticate that way or reject them. All right. Now, any regular user that fires up a web browser and starts browsing the internet is going to have JavaScript enabled. And so when they hit the login page, they don't see a CAPTCHA. They just get the login experience, they go in, and they never even know that a challenge happened in the background. All right. For a bot, though, it's not going to support JavaScript. It doesn't need to render the page to do its job. And so it's going to fail that check, and it's either going to get rejected outright or get a CAPTCHA. Now, Encapsula actually does some other things too, like it tries to create a cookie. If you've got an automated bot script, it's not allowing cookies to be created. And so it fails the cookie creation test, and that triggers the CAPTCHA as well. All of these are different things that trigger that CAPTCHA. If it's ever accidentally triggered, well, a user will just clear the CAPTCHA and move right through, right? But a bot won't. And we were able to put this protection just on our login page, which is where the attack was targeted anyway. And once that was put in place, that stops not only this type of attack or this particular attack, but any future attack like it that's pointed at our login page. And we know the rest of our site, like which pages have input fields and which pages don't. So blocking things like post commands to pages that don't have input fields, or checking for SQL injection on the fields on the pages that do have input fields. A developer can completely forget to sanitize their input, and we can check for it on the firewall and stop it before it even gets to the application. So those are all great ways to protect it. And once we put that in place, we were able to verify that we were still blocking traffic the same way, but now our end users were not seeing the CAPTCHA at all. That's the long-term solution we wanted. We still have the protection, but it doesn't affect our regular end users. That's really important. The bots and the attackers, they get affected, but not the end users. That was all kind of a key piece of getting that put in place. All right, now at that point, we're effectively done. We solved our problem, things are good, but we need to identify the lessons learned. Like, what did we learn from this attack? And there were a handful of things that popped up that were important to us. First off, we should have known our baseline better. And by our baseline, I mean, what does normal ITProTV traffic look like? Here's an image that I snapped at our peak usage time. So when our site was the busiest, and I picked a weird time, I guess, because Australia must have been asleep. Nobody in Australia was logged in. But if you look at the rest, we have a lot of US traffic, a lot of European traffic, some traffic throughout Asia, very little in South America and Africa. This is what traffic normally looks like. And you can see attacks. We're normally under attack. That's how ITProTV is. So I can see those attacks that are out there. This is what normal traffic looks like. If I had a good picture of this in my head, if the rest of the team had a good picture of this in their head, they would have been able to spot right away, hey, we're getting traffic from way more sources than we normally would expect. That's just way out of our norm. All right. The other thing is we should have had automated responses in place. When we got that phone call at dinner, that's not how you should find out about a problem. We should have seen the increased volume in traffic. And so we've set up monitors and alerts for that now to let us know we have increased traffic on any particular page to be able to alert us. We also learned that while we already had a web application firewall, so we knew they were really cool, we learned that they're really critical. Imagine if this had happened and we didn't have a WAF. If we didn't have a WAF, I wouldn't have been able to put that CAPTCHA in place. If the CAPTCHA is on your server, the traffic's already made it to your server. So you have to stop it before it gets to your server, and a WAF lets you do that. They can be implemented really inexpensive. If you're in EC2 with Amazon, they have the AWS WAF now that you can turn on, and it's pennies on the dollar for a month. So really inexpensive to do. Solutions like Securi, it starts at like $20 a month, really inexpensive. So it's not breaking the bank to put something like this in place. If you go with a hardware WAF, they do get a little bit more expensive, but they are an amazing solution. And if you're providing a web interface on the internet, you really should have one in place. And the last thing we learned is that we needed to pay better attention to when we outgrew solutions. Security had worked so well for us for so many years, and we were so happy with the product that it was hard. It was hard for me to, I get emotional over software, to say like, I love the product. It's great for what it does, but we've changed enough where it's not a good fit anymore. And we should have made that decision easily a year before and didn't. So, that's important. Anytime you implement a solution, you need to constantly evaluate, is it still suitable for what you intended? That's a real key thing. All right, so that's pretty much all the time I have for my part of the presentation. Hopefully, I've shed a little light on how distributed denial of service attacks look and ways that you can stop them. What I want to do now is I want to kind of open up the floor to questions. And Wes, have you been fielding questions from the group?
Most definitely. We've got some great viewers out there. We got one coming in, and it said, we had a few questions regarding vendors. Matthew did not give a city. He said, you mentioned Securi and Encapsula. Any others that you recommend?
There's a bunch that are out there. Before we chose Encapsula, I wish I had brought it with me. I did a whole breakdown of like 8 different vendors that were out there. There's several different ones. Most of them, at the end of the day, are using the same type of technology, which is just a security plugin into Nginx or into Apache. So there are a lot of them are built off that same technology. I'm trying to remember who were some of the other options. If you shoot me an email, Don at ITPro.tv, I can send you that list that I had. Gartner also has a good Magic Quadrant on it. If you do a Google search for WAF Gartner Magic Quadrant, you'll find a bunch, and you'll see Encapsula and some of the other ones that are on there. I just can't recall offhand. Sorry.
All right, so Matthew came out of hiding here. Modesto apparently is where Matthew's from, so thank you for that question. Looks like we've got another question coming in. I have a small business. Should I be worried about DDoS, or is this more of a big business problem? Great question.
So it could be considered a big business as far as like a targeted DDoS. People target Microsoft and Sony and places like that all the time because they're big companies, they're big targets. For small businesses, you're definitely not going to get volumetric attacks. It doesn't make sense to do that. But targeted attacks like the one that happened against us, those are becoming more and more commonplace, and you'll see that. Now, if you're hosting your own website on your own on-prem solution, then yeah, you will need to worry about that. If you're hosting it somewhere else, though, reach out to that provider. Maybe you've got like a Squarespace page. Call up Squarespace and say, do you have distributed denial of service protections in place? And they'll tell you yes or no. And if they say no, then you can look at implementing solutions. Some of the bigger ones, I know I was trying to remember before, they're kind of popping into my head. Like we talked about Securi and Encapsula. There's Cloudflare and Radware. I think those were the other 2 that were in the top. There are other solutions you can reach out to. Some, like Securi and Cloudflare, are actually pretty cheap. Radware and Encapsula are more expensive, but they have a lot more functionality. So, look into it, do some research. I personally would recommend implementing a WAF in between any site in the internet today. Even if it's not a denial of service attack, there's other attacks that happen, and WAFs will protect you from that.
All right, got a lot of great questions coming in here. Got another one. Suggestions for dealing with a DDoS without a web application firewall. Kevin from Asheville.
All right, so let's say we didn't have one, right? And this attack started. Well, now I've got a problem. I could contact the ISP and tell them what's going on, but what are they going to do? They could say, well, we could block any traffic going to /login. Well, that would break off my regular users. My regular users wouldn't be able to log in anymore. That's not acceptable. I could change the URL of the logging page. That would be really temporary. That wouldn't work so well. So instead, what I would have to do is try and implement something in between, some kind of filter in between. And maybe you build something up yourself. You just fire up an Nginx box in AWS. You would need to redirect your web traffic through that, which means changing DNS records. Now, changing DNS records will not immediately solve your problem because it takes your users a few minutes, sometimes a few hours to detect the DNS change and reroute. But all of the bots are still pointed to your direct login. They've probably cached that DNS entry. So depending on what your time to live for your DNS records is, it could take a while before the bots flip over and start getting filtered through your system. So what I recommend is if you don't have any kind of filter in between your DMZ and the internet, that at a minimum, you should lower the time to live on your DNS records as low as you can so that when a disaster does occur, you can redirect with minimal impact. Otherwise, you could be down for hours while you're waiting on DNS records to refresh.
All Right. Again, we got more great questions coming in. Another question for you here, Don. When is it right to call the FBI, the police, or the authorities? I guess if you're in the detection phase and we see something's going on, when do we make a call?
So, this is a tough one to answer because for the most part, contacting the authorities is not really going to solve your problem. It's not going to stop the attack, but it is going to start an investigation. If you have cyber insurance, you may be required to contact the authorities right away. You haven't been breached, your data hasn't been compromised yet, but you are under attack. So you should reach out to your cyber insurance company if you've got it. And if you have cyber insurance, they've probably already given you instructions on what to do. Now, assuming you don't have cyber insurance, most companies don't, then it's kind of up to you whether or not you want to contact them. In the case of ours, the odds of figuring out who this was going to be was extremely low. It was going to be international anyway, so now it's not the FBI, it's Interpol that has to get involved, and it can take years for an investigation like that to go anywhere. So typically, we just put our protections in place, we fix the problem, we call it a day, and we move on, and the person goes unprosecuted. That's why these attacks are so common.
All right, great questions here. But before we move into the next question, let's just give Walter from Concord, North Carolina, his time in the spotlight. Thank you for a great question on that last one. Another question we've got Rich from Tennessee asking, what's the difference between a WAF and an edge firewall like Cisco offers?
All right, so edge firewalls, if we have something like an ASA or any other filter like that, Juniper SSGs, those kind of firewalls, they're great for filtering all sorts of traffic, right? And they typically operate in between layer 1 and layer 4. So they're looking at source and destination IP, they're looking at source and destination port. That's the primary things they filter on. Some of them have ALGs built into them, application layer gateways. Those go all the way up to layer 7. And that's exactly what a web application firewall is doing, right? So ALGs are looking into the traffic and figuring out what they can filter and protect. Now, the nice thing about solutions like Cisco's is they do way more than web traffic. If you have an email server, if you have file servers, NFS, FTP, something like that, other services, those firewalls have mechanisms in there for identifying that traffic and determining whether there's known threats in them, right? Web application firewalls, on the other hand, focus on, well, web applications, right? They're looking at port 80, port 443, and they're analyzing the headers of all of the HTTP requests that are going back and forth. So they're a little more specialized. So I'm glad you bring it up, though, is that there is more than one solution to this, and you may be able to leverage your existing firewalls if you've already got them.
All right, great question there. We got another one coming in from Canada. These target attacks are usually TCP traffic or UDP traffic. They're more of a question. Are they?
Sure.
And is that something that can hint as an attack as well? So this is kind of twofer.
Sure. So they're almost always TCP, almost always. And that's because they're expecting to get a response back, right? They're expecting to get some kind of information back, affirmative or negative. UDP attacks are typically where they don't expect a response. If it's just a volumetric flood, for example, they may do UDP. But if you're running a web server or email server, right? Web, if you have Apache Nginx, they don't use UDP. If you have an email server, SMTP, POP3, IMAP, they don't use UDP. So a lot of firewalls are already blocking UDP. And as a result, UDP floods are not very common. When you do see them, it's usually targeting VoIP servers or streaming servers where UDP is put in use. And those tend to be more volumetric. They don't need a response. They're just trying to overwhelm the line and hit it with a ton of traffic. You also see UDP used in like VLAN hopping attacks because, again, you don't necessarily expect it to come back to you. Those are effective there. But these targeted attacks are almost always TCP. And so that's why you can't just use basic IP tracking to be able to figure out whether this is an attack or not.
All right, Don. Well, that looks like it is the last question for the day. We do appreciate all of our viewers watching. But before we wrap up here, we do have one final thing that we wanted you to know that we have an offer for you. And if you're a career changer like me, one of the things that I love about this is that if you live on a working man's salary, a working person's salary, it's a free membership, no credit required, variety of plans. You can have access to things like our daily live feed and select courses. That is one that is near and dear to my heart as a career changer.
Yeah, and for teams, for businesses, is actually a great solution as well. We have a really neat system with our Pro Portal where you can assign courses to people and you can track whether they're actually watching it. So if you're trying to educate your team. But the great thing is that with ITProTV, it's a subscription to our whole library. So there's a lot of topics that are out there: security, networking, databases, graphics and office, development, that it's hard to stay on top of it. And if you're an individual or a team, you can come over to us and we can help train you and get you the knowledge you need to be successful.
All right. Well, thank you for being here, and we appreciate you, the viewers who are watching. Signing out here for IT Pro in the Know. I've been your host, Wes Bryan,
And I'm Don Pizzette.
and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. You'll receive a link to a recording of the webinar delivered to your inbox. All of the questions we didn't get to will be answered via Twitter at #ProsKnow. Remember that coupon code is Webinar30. See you next time on IT Pro in the Know, the IT Pro TV webinar series.